Tonight, we wander into the ancient sands of Mesopotamia, where time itself seems to hold its breath, waiting. Imagine your boots crunching softly over dried mud, cracked by countless centuries, each step kicking up little puffs of dust that catch moonlight like ghosts dancing around your feet. It's quiet here, too quiet. Just you, the night air, and the hollow shells of long-abandoned temples. You feel watched. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. But hey, you clicked on the video, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, go ahead and drop your location and the local time down below. I always picture you somewhere fascinating and slightly spooky. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're at Eridu, perhaps the oldest city ever built by human hands. Or at least that's what your friendly neighborhood historians keep telling you. Situated in the once fertile crescent of ancient Sumer, this isn't just another dusty archaeological site. This place was a metropolis when Rome was still a bunch of hills with goats and aspirations. As you tread carefully among shattered bricks and fragments of pottery, you recall how Sumerians saw Eridu as more than just their first city. They believed this place was the center of the universe, where the gods first descended to Earth and said, you know what? Humanity might just work out. But wandering these deserted ruins now, you can't help noticing they have that distinct, we should definitely leave right now kind of vibe. The city was built around a sacred temple dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. However, looking around at the cracked earth, you wonder just how wise Enki was, choosing this spot. Everything here feels ancient and exhausted, as if the city spent all its secrets a long time ago. Yet beneath your feet something shifts slightly. Probably just sand, right? Eridu, despite being empty for millennia, has a way of whispering. Not literally, because cities don't have mouths, at least we hope not, but figuratively, the breeze carries half-forgotten murmurs of prayers and rituals. Or maybe that's just tinnitus acting up again. The temples here weren't just places of worship. They were places of power, political intrigue, and as some suggest, something considerably weirder. Scholars still argue whether the temples served as astronomical observatories, spiritual portals, or just places for priests to lounge dramatically while eating figs. Whatever their actual purpose, it's clear the locals treated them with serious respect, or maybe serious anxiety. Because beneath Eridu, according to legend, lies something older than the gods of Sumer themselves. Something intentionally buried deep, hidden beneath layers of mud brick, sandstone, and determined denial. You can't help imagining some harried priest centuries ago stamping his foot, insistently shouting, "Absolutely nothing down there! Nothing at all!" while hurriedly covering up a suspiciously deep hole. Historical records casually mention mysterious rituals conducted here, usually in vague terms like sacred rites. When ancient writers get vague, you know they're probably glossing over some seriously sketchy stuff, like your uncle who travelled for business in countries without extradition treaties. You gently kick a stone fragment aside, noticing its cuneiform carvings worn smooth. Who knows what strange intonations these symbols once conveyed? Probably something cheerful like, "May crops flourish," and "Oh, please eat us again, weird god beneath our feet." Your fingers brush against a larger stone carving partially buried in sand. Pulling it free, you squint at faint etchings depicting an unsettling scene, figures bowing before something indistinct, large, and rather tentacle-like. Oh good, ancient Sumerian calamari worship, exactly what you needed tonight. But jokes aside, Eridu has always felt off-limits, even to modern archaeologists. Something about it makes people quietly uncomfortable, which explains why it's one of Mesopotamia's less studied ruins, despite being foundationally important. It's the historical equivalent of that room in Grandma's house nobody ever opens. You know there's probably just boxes of Christmas decorations in there, but you can't shake the feeling it's hiding a bit more. You raise your gaze towards the crumbling ziggurat nearby, a stepped pyramid that once reached for the heavens and now mostly reaches for sympathy. The priests here knew things that historians have diligently recorded and things they preferred to quietly ignore. Eridu whispers these ignored things gently, if you listen hard enough. The sand under your feet gives way a little, and you feel your stomach flutter. Is it excitement, nerves, or last night's questionable falafel? Whatever it is, you find yourself stepping carefully toward the shadow of the temple, its looming structure now silhouetted against stars older than Eridu itself. You pause, inhaling the dry, papery scent of dust and lost time. Whatever lies beneath your feet tonight, sleeping or listening, it waits patiently. After all, it's already waited thousands of years. What's another moment or two? Fingers run gently across the rough edges of a clay tablet you've just unearthed, its cuneiform symbols delicate yet strangely sharp beneath your touch. Squinting, you try to decipher these little wedges and lines, marveling at how the Sumerians managed to invent an entire language out of what looks suspiciously like chicken scratches. Honestly, if handwriting was an Olympic sport, Sumeria might have struggled to qualify. But as confusing as these inscriptions may seem, historians still argue whether the Sumerians deliberately wrote in riddles or if it's just ancient scribes messing around. Yet tonight, beneath Eridu's silent stars, these fragments seem less humorous, more cryptic, quietly urging you to delve deeper. There's mention here and there of rituals, ceremonies, prayers, all the standard things you'd expect from a civilization obsessed with appeasing temperamental gods. But tucked away among familiar praises for Enki, the wise god of fresh water and cleverness, is a passage oddly defaced, almost angrily scratched out, as if the tablet's author suddenly remembered they'd left the oven on mid-sentence. Your curiosity sparks. You squint again, holding the tablet closer, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across its carved surface. There's something unsettling about erased histories, gaps that feel deliberate. It's like flipping through someone's photo album and noticing certain faces hastily snipped out. Clearly, someone here had beef with this mysterious deity, or more likely, calamari. Tentacle jokes aside, there's definitely something more going on beneath these scratched-out wedges. You rise, dusting your hands, eyes flicking across the scattered ruins. Eridu has always fascinated historians and archaeologists because of its contradictions. It's the birthplace of civilization, yet so little is known about what the Sumerians truly feared or worshipped in secret. You wander further, noticing the subtle hum in the air, almost electric. Or perhaps that's your brain deciding it needs sleep more than deciphering ancient chicken scratch. Kneeling again, you discover another fragment lying partially submerged in fine sand. This one's clearer, or at least less violently censored. Your heart quickens slightly as you recognize the symbols for darkness, and below, alongside what loosely translates as forgotten name. Even the ancients loved a bit of drama. Who doesn't enjoy a good mystery deity locked beneath your basement? This unnamed god doesn't appear in standard histories, but scattered clues across Eridu's ruins point to something deeply revered and feared. Fragments mention sealing ceremonies, rites intended not just to worship, but to confine or pacify. You can't help imagining Sumerian priests nervously checking their watches, hoping the rituals work because they had dinner plans. But how do you deliberately forget a god? Especially one apparently so unsettling that simply erasing its name was deemed insufficient. It had to be physically buried, submerged in water, sand, and conveniently forgotten memories. The practice of destroying names in ancient cultures wasn't mere superstition. It was psychological warfare, erasing identities to extinguish power. If they truly believed names held power, erasure meant severing that power's hold over reality itself. Or at least that's the theory historians still bicker about, usually loudly at academic conferences after too much wine. You recall reading about similar practices in ancient Egypt, pharaohs erasing rivals' names from monuments. But here, the erasure feels more frantic, less politically petty, more genuinely afraid. It's like ancient Sumerians collectively decided, if we pretend we never worshipped it, maybe it'll leave us alone, stop peeking through our bedroom windows at night. As you stand up, the air feels thicker, a whispering breeze rustling dried grass between the crumbling walls. It's the kind of breeze horror movies enjoy right before someone dramatically vanishes. You quickly glance around. No one else is here, at least visibly, yet that sensation persists, like you're being watched, studied. Perhaps this forgotten god has nothing better to do after a few thousand years of solitary confinement beneath the desert floor. Another fragment catches your eye, unusually smooth, placed deliberately atop a small stone pedestal. You lift it gently, surprised by its weight, its polished surface cool under your fingertips. This one is almost intact, a rarity in archaeology where things generally seem eager to crumble into dust when you breathe too heavily. The text is clear, carved with precision, and thus we bury thee beneath the waters of forgetfulness, that your whispers shall not haunt the ears of men, nor your shadows darken our dreams. Well, that clears things up nicely. Just your average bedtime prayer for a god nobody particularly liked. But seriously, how often does an entire civilization come together and decide, yeah, let's forget this deity forever? Eridu's forgotten god must have really crossed some lines. Maybe it was one too many tentacle jokes after all. You let the tablet settle back onto its pedestal, a quiet respect forming in your chest for the sheer determination these ancient priests displayed in suppressing whatever force terrified them. The stars above flicker dimly, as though aware you're treading dangerously close to truths better left buried. You pause, exhaling softly into the chill of the desert night, wondering exactly how much sleep you're going to lose over this. But Eridu isn't letting you off easy tonight. Another soft shifting of sand nearby draws your attention, a subtle invitation or warning. You glance nervously at your watch, realizing you've been poking around ancient curses a bit too long. But hey, what's archaeology without a little existential dread? A final glance around assures you no lurking shadows have crept closer, at least visibly, and you step cautiously towards a half-buried staircase revealed by the shifting sands. It descends into darkness, promising deeper whispers and secrets older than humanity itself. Great, you think, a basement. Those never end badly. Taking a deep breath, you place one careful foot onto the first step, feeling it solid beneath you. It's cool, stable, comforting even, yet beneath that comfort lies a quiet, persistent hum, a hum suggesting perhaps some things were forgotten, not but because they were frightening, but because they were waiting. As you descend the ancient staircase, the temperature drops gently, like stepping into a forgotten cellar on a hot day. Only this cellar probably hides fewer vintage wines and more inexplicable horrors. Each step seems to sigh softly beneath your weight, stone worn smooth by countless feet from centuries past. Oddly comforting, you think, as long as you don't dwell on exactly who or what once made these same footsteps before you. Ahead lies the submerged temple complex you've heard mentioned in hushed academic whispers, the kind usually reserved for grant proposals or talking about which professors are secretly vampires. Sumerian architecture had a certain grandiosity, ziggurats towering toward the heavens, but this Turanian place feels distinctly different, almost secretive, as if it resented being found. Soon, your feet touch a stone platform, partially flooded with cool, clear water that laps gently against the carved walls. Moonlight drifts through gaps above, casting rippling patterns across the temple's interior, nature's own low-budget disco lighting. Kneeling briefly, you dip your fingertips into the water, half expecting tentacles to tickle back. Fortunately, nothing dramatic happens. Yet. Local legends always whispered of Eridu's submerged temple, claiming priests deliberately flooded it, sealing away an unnamed god so troublesome it had to be quite literally drowned out. Flooding was a serious step. Ancient Sumerians revered water, connecting it to both life and spiritual purity. To deliberately drown a temple, an act of sacred desecration, meant this god seriously overstayed its welcome at divine dinner parties. You notice faded relief carvings along the walls, scenes of priests and supplicants engaged in solemn rituals, standard ancient stuff, chanting, offerings, maybe debating whether wearing robes in desert heat was really worth it. But there's something subtly off about these depictions. Figures look apprehensive, casting wary glances toward the central altar. One priest, carved in striking detail, wears an expression universally recognizable as this wasn't covered in priest school. Historians still argue whether flooding temples was purely symbolic, intended to cleanse and renew, or if it served as a practical barrier, blocking access to something tangible and troubling. Gazing into the dark waters, now you're leaning heavily toward the troubling side of that debate. Honestly, ancient civilizations had a knack for leaving troubling things behind, especially the kind of things that future archaeologists discover at exactly midnight. beneath deserted ruins. Moving further into the flooded chamber, your eyes adjust to the dimness. Beneath the water's surface, you can vaguely see the outlines of stone structures, benches, altars, maybe ancient vending machines. Just kidding, but imagine if. This hidden place was clearly important, kept secret beneath the bustling city streets above. You can almost hear those ancient priests nervously instructing initiates. Just don't tell your parents about our little downstairs deity, okay? As you wade carefully forward, your boot nudges something submerged and solid. Definitely not comforting. Reaching down gingerly, you grasp it and lift, water dripping steadily from the smooth stone surface. Another clay tablet emerges into the dim light, this one perfectly preserved beneath the waters. Ancient Sumerians were surprisingly good at waterproofing their cryptic tablets, probably an essential skill when your primary pastime was writing doom-laden prophecies. Holding it closer, you decipher inscriptions referencing rituals involving waters of forgetting and the sealing of unspoken names. Eridu's priests clearly viewed memory as dangerous, something powerful enough that even naming their hidden deity risked unleashing it. Perhaps some ancient beings, much like student loans, survive simply by acknowledgement. And what exactly required so much effort to silence? Your tablet hints at rites meant to lull, soothe, and ultimately drown an entity whose whispers disturbed dreams, unsettled reason, and challenged the dominion of gods known to men. Basically, the kind of deity who overstays its welcome at divine house parties, debating theology at 3 a.m. and eating all the ambrosia. You glance again at the carvings along the walls, noticing subtle shifts in style. Later images seem deliberately blurred, distorted, as though subsequent artists tasked with maintaining the temple grew uneasy, representing whatever lurked here. The further you explore, the more obvious it becomes that ancient priests struggled with something deeply unsettling, something even their eloquent scribes refused to name explicitly. You sympathize, really. Who hasn't struggled to describe the indescribable, like trying to explain TikTok to grandparents? The water around your ankles seems colder now, though you're pretty sure physics doesn't usually work that way. It's almost like the temple itself wants to politely escort you toward the exit, but you're stubborn, or perhaps archaeologically reckless, and you press forward to the central altar, partially submerged yet undeniably grand. Smooth stones form a circular platform, carved precisely, as though expecting something important, maybe a deity-sized octopus to gently sit upon it. Your flashlight flickers gently over the submerged stonework, revealing intricate symbols and patterns etched deeply into the rock, designed to channel or perhaps restrain unseen energies. Whatever was summoned here long ago, ancient priests were extremely careful about how they invited it and how quickly they encouraged it to leave. Clearly, hospitality had limits in ancient Mesopotamia, even for gods. A sudden ripple in the water distracts your attention, gentle but definite. You glance around nervously, half expecting something large, ancient, and tentacled to greet you warmly. Thankfully, nothing emerges, just the reflection of the moon trembling slightly as water shifts again. You release a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding, chuckling quietly at your own nerves. After all, if ancient gods wanted your attention, they'd hardly bother with subtle ripples. More likely, they'd send cryptic tweets or at least leave passive-aggressive post-it notes. But jokes aside, Eridu's submerged temple feels deeply serious, a place of deliberate containment and careful forgetting. Standing here, ankle-deep in sacred waters, you understand how carefully the ancients treated whatever slept beneath. This wasn't just superstition, it was strategic, measured reverence, and perhaps just a tiny bit of genuine fear. You pause, allowing silence to reclaim the flooded chamber, feeling both curious and cautious. Whatever remains hidden beneath Eridu, forgotten or sleeping, waits patiently. And though historians might debate endlessly about this lost deity's true nature, tonight, beneath quiet starlight and whispering waters, you sense you're not entirely alone. Stepping back from the flooded altar, you cast your eyes upward, observing how thin streaks of moonlight filter through cracks in the temple's crumbling roof. Each beam gently illuminates sections of walls, etched with symbols that seem to shift slightly whenever you glance away. Though admittedly, that could just be your imagination working overtime after midnight. Ancient temples can be rather dramatic, after all. Yet here, beneath Eridu's forgotten stones, imagination feels oddly insufficient to explain the quiet, persistent whispers that brush the edges of your consciousness. These aren't clear voices, thankfully, because at that point you'd officially have to update your resume to Ancient God Channeler, but subtle echoes, murmurs drifting between the ancient walls, almost conversational but never fully coherent. Carefully navigating back through the shallow waters, you pause beside a series of smaller carvings, tucked discreetly into an alcove. These depict Sumerian priests performing rites around a towering, amorphous figure. The artists clearly struggled with representing this deity. It seems shapeless, vague, more symbolic than literal, like when your kindergarten self proudly showed mom a scribble, insist it was a family portrait. This god had no set image, or perhaps ancient priests deliberately avoided giving it a fixed form. After all, it's easier to forget something if you never fully acknowledge it to begin with. But why erase a deity so completely? Ancient civilizations worshipped all sorts of unsettling entities. War gods demanding blood, fertility gods demanding... Well, let's leave that there. So what exactly did this forgotten god demand to warrant total obliteration from collective memory? Historians still argue whether this deity represented chaos, forbidden knowledge, or perhaps something more abstract, like existential dread or tax audits. Your fingers trace a line of carefully engraved symbols around the carving's edge. Even with limited understanding, you recognize repeated references to silence, forgetting, and dreams. Dreams played a massive role in ancient Mesopotamian spirituality, seen as gateways to divine communication. But this god's dreams seemed different, unsettling. Perhaps the priests worried less about offerings and more about the quality of their sleep. Understandable, honestly. Who enjoys waking up at 2 a.m. haunted by eldritch nightmares? Moving further, your flashlight reveals an inscription clearer than most. It reads, "In dreams shall it return, in waking shall we deny it." Honestly, ancient civilizations loved cryptic warnings, usually delivered dramatically moments before someone stumbled into exactly the trouble they were warned against. You imagine some poor ancient priest reading this inscription, shrugging dismissively and instantly regretting it when tentacles appeared during breakfast. Humor aside, this phrase feels poignant, haunting, especially standing here isolated beneath an ancient city, in a silence thick enough to taste. It suggests priests genuinely believed denial was a powerful shield. If the deity required acknowledgement, then silence could starve it, rendering it harmless. Either that, or it would just get crankier. 50-50 chance, really. But here's where history complicates things even more. Sumerians typically named their gods obsessively. Every river, tree, and pebble had some divine overseer with an elaborate backstory. Yet there are absolutely no names carved here. No labels, no identification, just deliberate anonymity. This is uniquely unsettling, like finding family photos with all the faces cut out. Anonymity wasn't negligence, it was protection. You recall that scholars studying Eridu often whisper quietly about a deity erased so thoroughly that even its vague echoes in mythological records vanished almost completely. Historians still debate whether Sumerians genuinely believed the mere act of naming something gave it power. In this temple, however, the answer feels obvious. They absolutely did. Further ahead, the chamber broadens into a circular hall dominated by a raised dais, sculpted meticulously and encircled with concentric channels, presumably for draining water, blood, or maybe spilled coffee from jittery priests. You approach, noting how the dais itself remains pristine despite centuries underwater. Clearly, it served a critical function. Ritualistic, certainly, though possibly more practical, though, like a containment vessel of sorts. Ancient priests were meticulous engineers, as anyone forced to memorize irrigation systems in 6th grade history painfully recalls. You kneel, touching the smooth stone. Beneath your fingertips, subtle grooves radiate outward, spiraling gently into delicate patterns reminiscent of ripples or dreams fading upon waking. The stone feels oddly warm, almost alive, but let's chalk that up to stress-induced hallucination rather than actual paranormal activity. Yet, as you linger there, palm pressed against ancient stone, you feel, or perhaps imagine, a faint pulse, rhythmic and gentle. Like something deep beneath Eridu breathes softly, waiting patiently, indifferent to your tiny presence. You withdraw your hand quickly, heart racing briefly before logic intervenes, insisting you just experienced an adrenaline-induced panic moment, or your heart decided it needed cardio. Standing again, you take a steadying breath, reminding yourself of your commitment to not becoming ancient god food tonight. Still, the sensation persists, a quiet yet palpable awareness emanating from beneath the dice. If something truly dwells here, buried and forgotten, its patience must be unfathomable. It probably doesn't mind another few minutes of waiting. You rationalize, as long as it doesn't lose its Wi-Fi signal. With that gentle humor, restoring some courage, you examine the chamber more closely. The walls here aren't just decorative, they seem instructive. Intricate carvings depict step-by-step ritual guidelines, how priests approached the dice, how they offered silence instead of praise, and how, ultimately, they drowned the chamber in water to seal away whatever lurked beneath. You can't help but wonder if, over countless generations, new priests came here hoping fervently their predecessors didn't mess things up. Ancient anxiety recorded in stone. This forgotten god, nameless yet powerful, feels intimately tied to Eridu itself, almost foundational. Its absence defines the city as surely as its presence once might have. Perhaps Eridu's earliest builders made a bargain: civilization, growth and prosperity, at the small price of eternal vigilance and careful forgetting. And yet tonight, as whispers brush quietly around you, you sense this ancient god doesn't entirely appreciate eternal oblivion. Like a teenager banned from the Wi-Fi network, it feels increasingly impatient. Subtle, restless beneath centuries of forced silence. You take a slow breath, acknowledging your nerves, yet oddly reassured by the gentle rhythm beneath your feet. Whatever waits patiently here, you remain safe for now, though perhaps slightly less confident in humanity's wisdom regarding buried gods. Turning to leave, you glance back once more. The dice remains motionless, patient, silently awaiting acknowledgement. Maybe denial truly works. Or perhaps tonight you've gently reminded something ancient, that memory, once lost, can be regained. Stepping back into the moonlit open air feels surprisingly comforting, like finally leaving a too serious art exhibit and finding a taco stand waiting just outside. But as your eyes adjust, revealing once again Eridu's scattered ruins stretching beneath the stars, you realize the city's quiet streets feel different now, subtly charged. Perhaps your little subterranean exploration stirred something awake, though hopefully nothing tentacled or deeply offended by your sarcasm. You wander slowly between half-toppled columns and broken walls, thinking about Eridu's origins. Sumerian myths portray Eridu as the first city built directly by divine hands, presumably because ancient gods didn't trust humans with zoning permits. According to these stories, civilization itself began here, when wisdom god Enki rose from the watery abyss, generously bringing knowledge, irrigation plans, and probably some blueprints scribbled hastily on napkins. Yet even from the beginning, Eridu wasn't just a cheerful urban development project. Myths subtly hint at tensions. Early gods squabbling, conflicts between humans and deities, and something darker lurking beneath the city's shiny, newly minted surface. Ancient records speak of Eridu as both a place of enlightenment and one of caution, a city always slightly wary of its divine benefactors. After all, when gods start handing out gifts, you're wise to double-check the terms and conditions. But tonight, under gentle starlight, the ruins whisper a story less about divine generosity, more about hidden compromises. Your footsteps echo softly along broken stone pavements, past weathered statues whose expressions seem vaguely judgmental, as though disappointed you're not wearing the proper Sumerian ceremonial attire. Honestly, ancient statues are the original fashion police. Moving deeper into the city, you pause beside remnants of a large public square. Once, crowds gathered here to witness rituals, announcements, or possibly to hear priests awkwardly explain yet another sudden drought. But one carving on a nearby wall grabs your attention. A depiction of Enki, the wise god himself, granting humanity the arts of civilization. Standard propaganda stuff, but there's something odd in the carving's background. Faintly etched, barely visible, a shadowy figure watches silently from the edges, indistinct yet undeniably present. You peer closer, curious. Whoever or whatever this shadowy entity represents, ancient artists subtly acknowledged its presence without openly declaring it. This shadowy watcher appears repeatedly in Eridu's imagery, lurking discreetly in backgrounds, almost like an ancient deity photobombing history's family album. Historians still argue whether this figure symbolizes chaos, an older deity replaced by newer gods, or simply an elaborate practical joke by bored ancient artisans. Yet, as you move through Eridu, similar subtle shadows persist. Another wall carving shows humans receiving laws and guidance from Enki. And there it is again, shadowy and vague, always watching. Ancient Mesopotamia's very own version of Where's Waldo, only creepier. Clearly, Eridu's residents understood that their gods, even Enki, weren't alone in shaping human destiny. Something else lingered here, quietly influential yet carefully unacknowledged. You walk further, feeling increasingly watched yourself. Glancing around, you remind yourself that the only eyes here belong to crumbling statues. Unless, of course, ancient gods developed excellent camouflage skills. Still, nerves twitch gently beneath your skin, the sensation of being quietly observed impossible to fully dismiss. Ahead, you notice remnants of ancient canals and irrigation channels carved ingeniously into Eridu's foundations. Mesopotamians excelled at hydraulic engineering. Water management basically defined their civilization. Yet these channels aren't purely functional. As your flashlight sweeps gently over stone edges, you spot engraved symbols, ritualistic and protective. Even their irrigation ditches got mystical security systems. Perhaps Eridu's founders understood water's dual nature, life-giving, yet also capable of concealment and secrecy. Floodwaters periodically destroyed ancient Sumerian cities, reminding citizens that divine gifts came with conditions. Yet Eridu deliberately invited water in, carefully managed, controlled, yet respected. It feels symbolic somehow, a quiet acknowledgement that what sustains civilization could also drown it. Ancient engineers clearly never missed an opportunity for dramatic metaphor. Your attention shifts to fragments of another tablet resting atop a nearby pedestal. Honestly, ancient Mesopotamians had an obsession with tablets. It's surprising they didn't invent the Kindle first. Brushing off sand gently, you decipher more references to floods, memory, and forgetfulness. The inscription reads cryptically, "When waters rise, memories return, guard them well." Okay, great. More ominous flood-related poetry to ensure you'll sleep restlessly tonight. But there's truth here. Historical floods periodically devastated Sumerian cities, reshaping Sicily culturally. Perhaps these events weren't simply natural disasters, but cyclical reminders, warnings about forgotten gods and suppressed truths inevitably resurfacing. Ancient priests may have believed that whatever lay beneath Eridu required constant vigilance, the kind of eternal reminder that comes annoyingly like a software update notification, ignored at your peril. Tonight, standing amidst the quiet ruins, you sense Eridu remains watchful, expectant. Its stones whisper softly of past glories, cautionary tales, and secrets willingly buried beneath layers of civilization. But forgotten gods rarely remain quietly forgotten forever. Eventually, something resurfaces, bubbling up through floodwaters or dreams, demanding acknowledgement, or at least politely hinting at acknowledgement via subtle existential dread. A gentle breeze brushes past and you realize you've stopped moving, lost momentarily in Eridu's silent whispers. You smile softly at your own nerves, shaking yourself back to reality. Though reality currently involves wandering ancient Mesopotamian ruins after midnight, debating existential philosophy with statues. Maybe reality lost its traditional boundaries somewhere around Section 2. Yet tonight, beneath stars older than civilization itself, Eridu feels quietly alive, resonating with hidden history. Whatever deity or force lingered in these shadows might remain unacknowledged officially, but unofficially, it shaped Eridu profoundly, quietly influencing humanity's earliest city and civilization itself. You turn slowly, gazing once more across the moonlit ruins, ancient stones waiting patiently. Whatever secrets Eridu guards tonight, they've endured millennia. Another few moments of your thoughtful silence won't trouble them. With gentle humor returning your courage, you continue wandering, your footsteps echoing softly. And beneath the ancient stones, something listens, quietly, patiently, and perhaps tonight, finally remembered. Your steps take you away from the remnants of the square and toward what must have once been the priestly quarters, if the crumbling walls and proximity to the temple are anything to go by. These were the minds entrusted with preserving civilization, decoding divine instructions, and possibly arguing over who left the ritual wine open again. But here, within this quieter corner of Eridu, you begin to sense just how much these priests might have known and how much they chose to hide. The rooms are small, narrow, deliberately private. You can picture hooded figures moving quietly through these spaces, murmuring prayers and copying tablets late into the night by lamplight. Maybe they recited the myths we still study today, Enki crafting humans from clay, gods granting kingship, and the flood that reset the world. Or maybe, just maybe, they wrote about something else, something they were forbidden to name, even in their most sacred texts. On a low bench, half buried in sand and cracked clay, lies another broken tablet. You shift it gently, surprised by the heaviness. The symbols here are denser, etched deeper, less decorative, more desperate. They speak of ritual concealment, a phrase that appears repeatedly. Not banishment, not destruction. Concealment, that's different. You don't conceal something unless you think it might return. The fragment describes a practice the priests called the ritual of forgetting. It wasn't just about memory, it was about creating a sacred void, an intentional blind spot in thought, myth, and worship. By refusing to name the god, by cutting it out of stories, art, and public ritual, they hoped to erase its tether to reality. You briefly wonder if this worked on annoying co-workers too, and then remember how badly denial usually backfires. Historians still argue whether this ritual was genuinely believed to protect Eridu, or was simply a political act to bury a rival cult. But something about this place, the deliberate silence, the shadowy carvings, suggests deeper conviction. This wasn't a political maneuver. This was fear. And the priests? They weren't just scribes or ceremonial figureheads. They were containment specialists, keepers of thresholds, guardians of silence. It's a lonely job, honestly. Imagine dedicating your entire life to making sure people don't remember something. No murals, no hymns, just cautious whispers and strategic omissions. Makes you wonder what their dreams were like. There's even a passage here that says, "The mouth forgets, but the soul remembers," which is either chilling or profoundly poetic, or both. You sit quietly with that for a moment. If a city forgets a god, but the god doesn't forget the city, what happens next? The answer, apparently, is dreams. Because that's the strange part of this ritual. The priests didn't just avoid naming the god. They built practices around avoiding thoughts, cleansing the mind before sleep, ritual silence at dusk, avoiding water at specific lunar phases. It's as if the god could only return through dream logic, slipping between memories and slipping back into relevance, dream by dream. You run your hands along the wall, feeling deep grooves in the stone. Not symbols, but scratches. Rows of them, countless short lines like tally marks. Maybe someone was counting prayers or days or nightmares. You back away slightly, uneasy now. One of the fringe theories about Eridu's fall, mocked in academic circles but still whispered at conferences over wine, is that the city didn't collapse because of climate change or economic strain. It was abandoned, not destroyed, just left quietly and permanently. There are no records of conquest, no dramatic fires, no cuneiform equivalent of "we had a good run, thanks for everything." Just an empty city, its temples flooded, its god deliberately forgotten, and its people gone. Some say they left because the land dried up. Others say the real reason was harder to explain, that they'd grown tired of forgetting. As you walk out of the priest quarters back into the open air, you catch your reflection in a small pool of water nestled between worn stones. For a moment, just a flicker, you swear the reflection isn't quite you. The outline seems blurred, elongated. Your hand raises instinctively to touch your face, but the image disappears, still as glass once more. You shake it off, probably just tired. You have been whisper-reading dead languages and communing with long-buried energies for a few hours. Perfectly normal behavior. But a tiny part of you lingers on that reflection. Because what if the ritual of forgetting didn't just erase the god from public memory? What if it left something behind? A spiritual echo, a dormant impulse, a quiet itch at the back of your thoughts that doesn't go away. That's the real danger of trying to forget, isn't it? You might succeed with your conscious mind, but your dreams never signed the non-disclosure agreement. You look up at the stars above Eridu, soft, silent, and ancient. They've seen this city rise and fall, They've seen gods worshipped, feared, and ignored, and perhaps they still see something moving below. You walk on, gently now, not out of fear but respect. These stones carry burdens older than memory, and for a time they held them well. The wind kicks up as you cross another threshold, this time through what appears to be a partially collapsed archway etched with symbols far more worn than anything you've seen so far. Unlike the temples and tablets you've passed, these markings are not formal cuneiform. They're simpler, messier, rushed, like someone scratched them into the stone just before abandoning the place for good. You pause beneath the arch, the structure groans softly in the breeze, like it remembers the last time someone walked through. A narrow corridor stretches ahead, its floor layered in silt and fine sand, sloping downward. Always downward. Because apparently, in ancient Mesopotamia, all roads to forbidden knowledge lead to increasingly claustrophobic hallways. As you step forward, the air changes, heavier now, cooler and thick with that stillness that only truly ancient places seem to hold. You're no longer wandering through what once was Eridu. You're now brushing up against what its priests worked so hard to bury, not just physically, but psychically, emotionally, a collective memory scabbed over by centuries of silence. This is where the ritual of forgetting began. You pass through another doorway, lower now, the ceiling forcing you to duck, and emerge into a small subterranean chamber. It feels untouched. Even the dust here seems more like ash, clinging to surfaces as if reluctant to move. The room contains only three things: a stone chair, a shallow basin carved into the ground, and a blackened niche in the wall. You approach the chair first. It's worn smooth, not by time, but by use. Countless bodies must have sat here night after night, decade after decade, enacting the same procedure. The seat of the ritual. You place your hand on the armrest, half expecting it to vibrate with leftover power. It doesn't. It's just cold. Solid. Real. The basin, however, is another matter. You kneel beside it. There's something in the water, not an object. Something in the way the reflection bends and blurs, as though reality gets a little confused here. You try to focus, but your thoughts slide sideways, like trying to look directly at a dream. Maybe that was the point. The basin wasn't for cleansing, it was for erasing. A psychological exit ramp for memories no one wanted to keep. A line from another tablet echoes in your mind. Water shall carry it away, and silence shall hold it fast. At the time it sounded poetic. Now it feels like instruction. You turn to the black niche in the wall. Charred. Soot-stained, yet somehow not crumbled. Symbols ring its edge, this time unmistakably cuneiform, though rushed and fragmented. Names, perhaps, or warnings. You can make out only one phrase with clarity: let no record remain. The ritual of forgetting, it seems, wasn't a single event. It was ongoing, a cycle. A task passed from generation to generation. Come here, sit, gaze into the basin, erase, whisper into the niche, seal away what stirs. Walk back up the stairs and pretend you remember nothing. There's even evidence that the priesthood had different training paths, public and private. Public priests handled festivals, weather predictions, prayers. Private ones performed the forgettings. Historians still debate how widespread this was, or if it only occurred in Eridu. But judging by how intensely localized this chamber feels, it's safe to say this was ground zero. You sit in the stone chair, cautiously, respectfully. For a moment, nothing happens. Then you close your eyes just to see what they might have seen. Darkness, stillness. Then dripping water and a whisper, far off, like the voice of someone calling through layers of sand and memory. Not words, but emotion. Sadness, hunger, loneliness. You open your eyes quickly. The room is the same, but your pulse is faster now. The whisper remains. Not external, but now behind your thoughts, like a melody you can't quite place. It's possible that this whole area has affected you psychologically. Or, you just accidentally subscribe to an eldritch god's newsletter by sitting in its chair. Happens to the best of us. Stepping away, you feel the urge to speak aloud, just to test if the silence really is part of the ritual, but something in your chest tightens. As if the air itself prefers silence, as if this room listens. You bow slightly, unsure why. Maybe just gratitude for still being you. You exit slowly, careful not to look into the basin again. Whatever you leave behind there has no intention of following. Probably. As you ascend back toward the surface, the walls feel closer than before. Not threatening, just aware. the way a library might feel after dark. Still, you climb, because the priests may have spent lifetimes forgetting, but now someone has remembered you. And that matters. There's a theory among fringe scholars, and let's be honest, fringe scholars are the most fun, that remembering is a kind of summoning. That every forgotten thing left alone long enough gathers power through neglect. That silence is not absence, but incubation. You step into moonlight again, grateful for the sky, for the stars, for air that doesn't hum with ancient dreams. The wind touches your face like a greeting, or a warning. Eridu's ritual of forgetting wasn't just a suppression tactic, it was a contract, and tonight you may have accidentally renegotiated it. You don't speak for a while after leaving the chamber. Not out of fear necessarily, though that hum behind your ribs hasn't entirely gone away, but because silence seems like the most respectful choice. Even your thoughts slow down as if your brain's trying to tiptoe through its own corridors, careful not to stir anything slumbering in the back rooms of memory. The wind shifts again. You're back in the open ruins of Eridu, but it feels different now. Like the city is watching you watch it. Every broken wall, every slab of carved stone suddenly carries more weight. Not just archaeological significance, but intention. These were decisions, deliberate acts of forgetting encoded in ritual and architecture. It's not just what's here that matters, it's what's conspicuously missing. You make your way toward a familiar structure, a mostly collapsed ziggurat rising like a broken tooth from the desert floor. But this time, you aren't looking at the stairs or the temple at its summit. You're interested in the base, specifically a section of wall showing a mythological sequence you hadn't fully appreciated before. The story, as told in traditional texts, is familiar. Enki, god of freshwater and wisdom, creates humanity from clay. He bestows the me, those divine decrees that bring order to the universe. Society is formed, cities rise, laws are written, and everything begins its long, glorious march toward taxes. But on this wall, the sequence doesn't end with kingship or temples. It ends with a figure sitting alone beneath waves. Not drowning, waiting. The style is distinct, almost crude compared to the surrounding panels, like a different hand etched it later, but it's unmistakable. The last frame shows the figure's eyes opening, wide, black. A storm spiraling where the iris should be. You feel your breath hitch, because there it is again, the forgotten god. Present in the periphery, lurking behind origin myths, not a creator but a witness, a counterpoint to progress, as if civilization needed a shadow cast behind it just to feel real. Scholars rarely agree on its identity. Some think it's a misinterpretation of Namu, the primordial sea goddess. Others believe it's a corrupted rendering of Enki himself. But there's a third theory, more whispered than written, that this god wasn't one of theirs at all. That it predated even the primordial pantheon, that it was here long before the clay was shaped into humans and long after the gods took their places in the sky. That it wasn't forgotten by accident or conflict, but out of necessity, because it didn't belong. Not just alien to Sumerian religion, but alien to reality as the Sumerians understood it. And yet it lingered, haunting their dreams, infecting their myths. Showing up at the edges like a stubborn smudge on a mirror you can never quite wipe clean. The problem is, when things don't have names, our brains tend to make them up. That's the origin of 1,000 monsters, spirits, and bedtime stories that end with someone never waking up. So the Sumerians did the opposite. They erased the name, purged the image, flooded the temple, and waited. Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than confronting the unknown is giving it definition. You step away from the wall, glancing at the surrounding debris. You begin to notice other details now, fragments of idols that have clearly been defaced in patterns. Eyes scratched out, mouths sealed, symbols broke just enough to make them unusable, but still recognizable if you really looked. These weren't acts of vandalism. They were instructions. Guidelines for forgetting, for unmaking. A fringe tablet you read once, one of those dusty museum bookshelf pieces that nobody quite knows what to do with, described a ritual called Namtar Bidu, the unnaming. It involved offerings of silence, water drawn at moonrise, and dream fasting. It wasn't performed in honor, it was performed in defense. The dream fasting part stuck with you. The priests believed that fasting from food could weaken the body, but fasting from dreams weakened the self, made it harder for certain things to find you, made it harder for the god beneath Eridu to follow you home. You shift uneasily, glancing toward the horizon. The stars feel sharper somehow, colder, the shadows cast by the ruins longer than they should be, stretching across the ground like reaching fingers. But that's probably just your flashlight dying. Probably. You crouch beside a fallen pillar and brush away layers of sand, revealing a small relief carving. It's familiar, a human figure bowed in supplication before a seated god. But this time the god is a blank oval, no face, no features, just an empty space where identity should be. And behind it something new. Rows of eyes, not drawn on the god, drawn around it. Watching it. Suddenly you get it. The god wasn't just erased because it was dangerous. It was erased because it was being watched by something else, something older, something even the gods were afraid of. You sit back, stunned. Is this what the priests feared? That the god beneath Eridu wasn't just disruptive, but compromised? Watched by something else? Something that punishes memory? It's a theory with no real scholarly backing. But standing here in the hush of a ruined city, built around a flooded temple and a silent god, it makes an uncomfortable kind of sense. Maybe the ritual of forgetting wasn't about suppression at all. Maybe it was the only form of mercy they had. And now, thanks to your curiosity, it's being remembered. Just a little, just enough. You're not entirely sure how you find the pit. One minute you're tracing forgotten glyphs with your fingers, wondering if ancient stone dust has any long-term psychological side effects. And the next, you notice a peculiar indentation in the earth. Not natural, not random. A perfect circle about 10 feet across, its edges lined with what might have once been fitted stone. It's partially collapsed, choked with sand and brush, but unmistakably artificial. The sacred pit. You crouch beside it. It doesn't look like much. If you passed it on a hike, you'd assume it was an old well or a forgotten fire pit and move on without a second thought. Which is probably exactly what the ancient priests were hoping for, disguise through decay. But here's the thing. It's mentioned in two sources that shouldn't overlap. One is a half-translated Sumerian tablet found in Eridu's lower excavation layers. The other is a later Babylonian clay prism, found miles away and centuries apart, that describes the hole that was not meant to be opened, sealed with dreams and stone. Historians still argue whether these are references to the same place. But standing here now, staring into the darkness of this half-choked pit, you don't need a dissertation to tell you they are. There's something about it, some invisible boundary. You haven't even leaned over, yet your stomach flutters like you're on the edge of a canyon. The air is heavier. Not foul, just dense, like someone compressed the atmosphere and forgot to decompress it again. You brush more sand away, revealing ancient etchings along the rim. They're not warnings, not quite, they're invocations, bids for protection, requests. Please. Let the seal hold. Let memory remain distant. Let the name be scattered among dreams. That last one chills you. Not because it's ominous, though it is, but because it's eerily poetic. As if someone, thousands of years ago, decided that the best way to protect the world was to let a god's essence drift loose like a feather, carried by sleeping minds, never gathering again in one place. You peer into the pit. It doesn't go deep, at least not visibly. The sand has filled most of it in, but something about it refuses to feel shallow. Your flashlight beam disappears into it like light falling into velvet. You imagine what might be buried down there, not a body, not a structure, a concept, a presence. Something that couldn't be killed or banished, only forgotten just well enough to keep it from taking shape again. An old story, undone not by fire or sword, but by collective silence. The Sumerians were geniuses of ritual, myth, and cosmic administration. They managed gods like middle managers. Everyone had a title, a domain, and a proper offering schedule. So if something slipped outside that structure, it must have truly defied categorization. Which makes sense. What do you call a thing that doesn't want to be known, only felt? A little gust of wind swirls into the pit and then abruptly stops, like even air has second thoughts. You back away slowly, heart thudding. Your brain offers you several reasonable explanations. It's late, you're tired, you've had too much second-hand ancient incense. But another part of you, a part you didn't know had a voice until tonight, whispers that this pit was never meant to be approached casually. There's an old story buried in the scribblings of a 19th century archaeologist who went slightly off the rails after a dig in southern Iraq. He wrote of a local legend about a breathing hole in the earth, something that exhaled when the stars were right. A God-sleeping mouth, as he called it. His notes were mostly dismissed, too fanciful, too unreliable. But the thing is, his sketch of the breathing hole matches this pit exactly. The diameter, the etched ring, even the strange way sound doesn't quite carry when you speak near it. You test this by muttering a word, your own name. Nothing. The moment the syllables leave your lips, they dissolve, not muffled, absorbed, like the pit is swallowing not just sound, but meaning, intent, identity. You step away again, faster this time, and that's when it hits you. This was never just a hole, it was a wound, cut into the body of the world by some long-forgotten event. Not a natural one, not a divine one, a rupture in reality itself. And the Sumerians, being the overachievers they were, tried to bandage it with rituals, silence, and stories they never finished telling. You turn slowly, suddenly aware of how isolated you are. There's no breeze now. The stars overhead look the same, but also not. A little too distant, a little too still, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. You remind yourself you're just an observer, a modern visitor piecing together fragments of myth, sleepwalking through ruins older than iron and kings. But the sacred pit doesn't care. It wasn't made for you. It was made because of something else. And it remembers, even if you try not to. You walk away from the pit, slowly at first, like you're trying not to startle it, like it might react if you move too quickly. Of course, that's nonsense. It's a hole in the ground, with some carvings and a little ominous energy, sure, but fundamentally just earth and stone. But the deeper truth is something you can't quite shake. That pit didn't just feel old, it felt aware. You shake off the feeling as you move back through Eridu's dusty streets, but the city won't let you. It clings to your thoughts now. The ruins feel denser, more alive, like they've noticed you noticing. There's a chill in the air that has nothing to do with temperature, just that subtle shift, like the world has tilted ever so slightly, and now everything's watching from the corner of its eye. You pause in front of a structure that looks almost like a library, though technically it would have been a scribal house or temple archive. Sumerians didn't have libraries the way we imagine, but they did store thousands of clay tablets, carefully stacked, organized, and mostly unreadable unless you spent your weekends studying wedge-shaped grammar. This particular archive had long since collapsed, but someone, recently by the look of it, had propped up a few half-buried tablets against the broken wall, maybe a previous archaeologist, or maybe someone else who felt compelled to dig just a little deeper. You kneel beside the stack. The first tablet is familiar. Praise for Enki, the wisdom giver. Blah blah cosmic order, water, fish. Standard fare. The second tablet, however, is a bit stranger. It's Babylonian, not Sumerian. You blink. That's odd. Babylon rose long after Eridu declined, and though the Babylonians preserved much of Sumerian myth, they rarely reference specific rituals from defunct cities, especially ones deliberately buried. This tablet describes a dream king, a figure who ruled not through conquest or decree, but through whispers in sleep. His city was built on silence. His people obeyed without knowing why. They forgot birthdays, names, and even how many children they had. But they followed him anyway, because his voice filled the gaps between their thoughts. The tablet ends with a single ominous line. When silence breaks, the city will rise again, not in brick, but in memory. Now, you're not saying that this dream king is definitely the forgotten god from Eridu, but come on, it's like finding a second horror movie with the same villain, but a new wig and a slightly different backstory. Historians argue about this kind of cross-pantheon material all the time, whether similar figures in Mesopotamian mythology are independent or rebranded versions of older gods, but you don't need a PhD to recognize the pattern. Eridu may have been buried, but its god lingered. In echoes, in dreams, in stories that travelled further than its people ever could. Across time, the whispers mutated. The forgotten god became a dream king, then a shadow in someone else's theology. Maybe even a cautionary tale for cultures that barely remembered its source. You move to another tablet. This one has no words. Just an image, concentric circles radiating outward from a central point, surrounded by tiny etched eyes. You've seen this before. Back in the chamber, on the dais. And, more disturbingly, on the tablet beside the sacred pit, where the nameless god sat ringed in watchers. This symbol wasn't artistic. It was functional, a glyph, a seal. The eyes weren't worshipping the god, they were watching it, policing its form, preventing it from pulling itself together. The Sumerians didn't just try to forget it, they left behind watchers, sigils, fail-safes, like a psychic quarantine. The wind picks up again, and you look up just in time to see a dust devil twist its way between the ruins. It scatters sand across the tablets, quickly covering the seal again. You don't stop it. Maybe you shouldn't have uncovered it at all. You stand slowly, brushing grit from your palms. The silence feels heavier now, less like emptiness, more like something listening, waiting for you to speak first. You whisper a quick apology. Because at this point, what could it hurt? You begin walking again, but your thoughts spin. You can't shake the feeling that something has shifted. You came to Eridu looking for buried history, and instead you found living memory, pulsing beneath the surface, stitched into myths across generations, never truly erased. And the Babylonians weren't the only ones who felt it. You recall another myth, Akkadian this time, of a figure called Kutu, the god of silence and smoke, whose temples held no idols and whose priests wore masks without mouths. Historians label Kutu a minor deity, barely studied, but the description sounds familiar, doesn't it? Same themes, same tools, silence, erasure, ritual void. You stop and lean against a crumbling wall, dizzy with the implications. What if the forgotten god didn't just survive Eridu's fall? What if it spread? Fragmented like a virus, attaching itself to stories, slipping into pantheons under different names, different forms, never quite fully present, but never truly gone? And what if the stories about it, silent kings, faceless gods, dream tyrants, were never myths? What if they were updates? You're not panicking, not exactly, but your heart is definitely considering it because myths evolve, gods evolve. But the thing beneath Eridu, it doesn't want temples or worship or sacrifice. It wants memory. It feeds on attention. And you've given it quite a lot of that tonight. You take a long breath and scan the horizon. The ruins are quiet again. Still, but somehow, you know, you're not alone. You don't speak. Not because you're scared, although, let's be real, you are, but because you're afraid speaking might confirm something. Like naming a thing gives it permission to answer back. So you walk in silence, past the ruins, past the pit, past the dazed feeling that clings to your skin like desert sweat. Your path takes you toward the outskirts of the city, where the outlines of forgotten homes ripple under the sand like bones beneath skin. These weren't temples or archives, just dwellings. Places where ordinary people once slept, ate, argued, loved, and importantly, dreamed. The Sumerians believed dreams were messages from the divine, that gods could whisper through the veil of sleep and implant visions, warnings, commands. Dream interpreters held real authority. People paid them with food, wine, and goats, just to find out if last night's dream of swimming in black water meant good luck or imminent doom. Spoiler, usually doom. But here's the thing, dream omens were usually specific. Crops failing, children being born, gods demanding better festival planning. In Eridu, though, the dreams that survived barely, through dusty tablets and paranoid oral tradition, weren't about events. They were about presence, faceless figures, deep water rising in a dry bed, eyes opening in walls, a pressure behind the sky. The dreams weren't prophecy, they were infection. You duck into one of the ancient homes, now just a stone outline waist-high to the sand. There's nothing left of the roof, nothing of the family who lived here. But in the corner, half hidden beneath a slab, you see it. A piece of clay, palm-sized, baked and broken. It's not cuneiform. It's a drawing, just a circle, surrounded by a spiral, surrounded by smaller dots. You've seen that spiral before, in the chamber, on the dais, on the pit. This isn't a formal symbol, this was personal. Like a child drew it, or someone desperate to document what they saw in a dream using the only medium they had. You look up, how many others drew this? How many etched it into stone, clay, or the backs of their minds, only to be told to forget it? It's easy to imagine now, a family sitting inside this very structure, one child waking up screaming, unable to explain the shadow from the dream. a mother drawing this spiral to calm them, or understand them, or protect them. Historians still argue whether dreams in ancient Mesopotamia were seen as wholly divine or as psychological outbursts misunderstood as omens. But here in Eridu, in these houses, it doesn't feel like a misunderstanding. It feels like a pattern. The forgotten god didn't speak through thunder or miracles or divine wrath. It spoke through repetition. And what are dreams, if not little loops we keep revisiting? The Babylonians had charts for dream symbols. So did the Assyrians, lists of what animals meant, what rivers meant, what shadows meant. But Eridu? Eridu's dreams weren't listed, because Eridu's dreams weren't meant to be remembered, and still they slipped through. You sit in the empty stone house, holding the little spiral tile in your palm. It's smooth, worn, clearly touched often. Someone held this, maybe for comfort, maybe as a ward, maybe as proof they weren't the only one dreaming. And the dots around the spiral, eyes again, you're sure of it now. Not decoration, not accident. They always knew something was watching. The Sumerians were obsessed with stars, charting constellations, mapping omens in the sky. Venus, Jupiter, Mars, they gave them gods and built calendars around their movements. But some references, rare, fleeting, mention stars that do not move, that do not blink, that do not belong. They're always paired with one term, Mulzi-Abzu, star from the deep abyss. Most scholars translate that as a poetic metaphor for the sea, a pretty way of describing unknown constellations that appeared low on the horizon. But what if it wasn't metaphor? What if they meant it literally? A star that came from below. You stand slowly, senses sharpened, that subtle hum in your chest again. It's not sound, it's something behind sound, a suggestion of attention. And it's building. You walk again, weaving through the outskirts, past homes, past low walls half digested by the desert. The stars above seem unnaturally still, like they're waiting, like they've tilted slightly to observe. And you begin to think, not for the first time, that maybe this god wasn't just forgotten. Maybe it was hidden. Maybe it hid itself. Not out of shame, but as strategy. Because a god that no one worships is weak, but a god that haunts forgotten cities, lingers in half-remembered dreams, and appears in drawings that people think they made up. That god is everywhere, not fully formed, not yet, but close, and all it needs is remembering, not worship, not prayer, just attention. You're giving it plenty. You pause one last time before leaving the house. The spiral tile still sits in your palm. It feels heavier now, almost warm. You tuck it gently into your bag, unsure why. Maybe for study, maybe for protection, maybe because part of you already knows. You're going to dream tonight, and whatever waits beneath Eridu has been waiting for this moment. You don't make it far before the whisper begins again. Not aloud, not in the way you hear your name called in a crowd, or the way wind rustles through dry grass. This whisper is internal, a murmur behind your thoughts, as if your brain is retelling something it hasn't been taught. A low echo, persistent and patient, surfacing from some pocket of memory that doesn't technically exist. You stop walking. There's an object up ahead, half buried in the sand near the ruins of what might have once been a shrine. Not a grand temple, just a modest structure. Its doorway collapsed, roof long gone. You kneel beside it, brushing aside grit until your fingers strike something cold, something unmistakably crafted. An artifact, a carved object, stone, but too smooth, too deliberate. Not a tool, not a weapon, a mask. And not the fun, festive kind. No exaggerated features, no ornamental flares. Just a smooth, featureless oval with only the faintest depressions where the eyes should be. The mouth is completely absent. You lift it gently. It's surprisingly intact, uncannily so, considering the centuries of erosion that have ravaged everything else around it. There's a faint symbol carved into the inside. Not cuneiform, not Akkadian. It's the spiral. Again, this time etched with utter precision. The mask belonged to someone, perhaps a priest, perhaps a dreamer, or maybe someone who made a choice to erase their face before the thing beneath Eridu could find it. Because if a god searches through dreams, what better way to hide them without identity? You think again of the watchers, the concentric eyes, the symbol repeated over and over, the idea that being seen is dangerous but being known is worse. Historians still debate whether Sumerian masks held ritual power or whether they were simply symbolic. But this isn't theatre, this is camouflage. You place the mask beside you and take a breath. The whisper sharpens for a moment. Not a word, just a feeling. Recognition. Something has noticed you. You decide to move. You don't run, because that always makes things worse, but your pace quickens. As you walk, the world seems to shift imperceptibly. Not in the way a horror movie would show. The buildings don't melt, the sky doesn't bleed, but the edges feel wrong. Like reality has slightly blurry margins now. You know you're tired, you know your mind could be playing tricks, but so many symbols, so many artifacts, so many whispers, and the same presence behind all of it. You arrive next at what appears to be a storage site, small clay jars, sealed amphora, shards of what once held offerings. Broken containers line the shelves and floor, most empty, most mundane. Except for one, a small vessel, black stone, egg-shaped, sealed with hardened resin. No markings, just that same uncanny smoothness as the mask. You reach out and touch it, and immediately recoil. It's cold, not normal cold. The kind of cold that feels like a concept, like it came from a place that doesn't recognize the rules of thermodynamics. You grip the vessel anyway. Curiosity and dread mixed together now in equal parts, buzzing under your skin. There's no logical reason why this item, unassuming, unmarked, should radiate such presence. But you know, it's not what's in the jar. It's what the jar has kept out, a containment, a lock, not physical, but mental, emotional. The vessel is a symbol or maybe a psychic anchor, something the priests poured their will into, hoping to trap the last lingering thread of the god's awareness, not the whole thing. Just a sliver, just enough to keep it from reforming fully. But you've touched it now, you've disturbed it. You place it back on the shelf gently. Too late. The whisper rises again, closer now. Not louder, but nearer. The pressure behind your thoughts tightens, like a presence standing just outside your periphery. Just one breath behind you. You do not turn around. You know better. Instead, you close your eyes and steady your breath. You try to remember the Sumerian protective phrases you studied years ago. Fragments, mostly. Half prayers, ritual tags. You whisper them anyway. Shamash is watching! Let the gate be shut! But none of these were meant for this god. It had no temple, no prayers, no offerings. It had secrecy. It had forgetting. You open your eyes and step forward. The whisper fades slightly, as if it's waiting, deciding, judging whether you're prey or participant. You reach a final chamber. Smaller, enclosed, more preserved than anything else. Here, relics are arranged in careful rows, not offerings, but artifacts of suppression, broken tablets, shattered idols, sealed scrolls. Items meant not to be used, but to be stored away, kept from memory. At the center, a pedestal, empty. Not recently, but ceremonially. A place where something used to sit. Perhaps the mask, perhaps as the vessel. Perhaps a tablet so dangerous they shattered it and buried the pieces across the city. You suddenly understand this entire city was an archive of suppression, not just for knowledge, but for thought. The priests of Eridu weren't just historians, they were jailers. And the thing they imprisoned wasn't a being, it was a concept, a thought form, a god made of memory, myth, and shared attention. You exhale slow, because the danger isn't in believing, it's in remembering. And now you do. You've followed the spiral back to its source. The forgotten god is no longer forgotten, and that changes everything. You stand in the center of the chamber, surrounded by silence so thick it feels carved. The walls press inward, not literally, but perceptually, like memory itself is trying to fold in on you. You're no longer just an observer. The moment you picked up the vessel, the moment you whispered those fragments of prayer, you crossed a line the Sumerians tried desperately to draw in sand and stone. And yet, you're still here. The god hasn't taken form. The stars haven't cracked open. The pit hasn't widened into an abyss that devours the world. Maybe you expected something more theatrical, but that's not how this god works. Because it never wanted fire or blood. It wanted access. It needed context. It required someone, you, to stitch the scattered symbols and spirals and fragments back together, to recognize the pattern, to remember. You leave the chamber and emerge back into open ruins, moonlight soaking every broken column, every fallen brick. The city feels different now, not more haunted, just more awake. As you walk, your mind flashes to every piece of ancient lore you ever skimmed over. Every oddly phrased prayer, every moment your professors dismissed with a polite shrug and a note that the translation was uncertain. You think of the tablets no one could fully decipher, the ones that rambled about mouths without names and cities made of thoughts. You think of the eyes. They were never warnings, they were alarms, placed not to ward off curious humans, but to alert something else if the god began reforming. Which raises a terrifying question. If you're remembering and others before you remembered, what happened to them? You glance back toward the chamber. The pedestal remains empty. But what if it wasn't meant to hold a physical object? What if it was symbolic? A placeholder for something conceptual? And what if you've just filled that space by reassembling the story in your head? Because here's the horror. You're not just remembering a forgotten god. You're hosting it. Not as possession, nothing that dramatic, more like a seed. One watered with stories, nurtured by curiosity, warmed by your willingness to step into the shadows and ask questions most people avoid. It's not evil, at least not in the way humans define evil. It's indifferent. It doesn't care about you, not really. It simply uses memory, as a bridge, as a vehicle. It's moved from temple to temple, tablet to tablet, dream to dream. And now, you're the next tablet. You sit on a worn step outside what may have once been a priest's quarters, staring at the sky. The constellations you know are still there, Orion, Taurus, the Pleiades, but they seem slightly rearranged, subtly, like they've shifted to accommodate a new pattern that only a part of your brain can perceive. You blink, and it's gone. But the shape lingers behind your eyes, a spiral, a slow turn inward. You remember something else from your reading, a line from a cylinder seal found not far from here, inscribed with desperate repetition. We forget so it cannot gather. We scatter the self. We break the form. You used to think that was metaphor. Now you're not so sure. The form has begun to reassemble, through fragments of art, myth, dream, ritual, and through you. You look down at your hand. The spiral tile you pocketed is warm again, not hot, not magical, just present, like it knows. You consider throwing it into the desert, but instinct stops you. It wouldn't matter. The forgetting only works when everyone forgets, and you don't, not anymore. You rise and walk slowly toward the edge of the city. You're close now. The boundary between Eridu and the rest of the world, the edge of the myth, the last threshold. You pause beside a broken monument, cracked in half, its base sunk into sand. There's an inscription at its base, barely legible. Most of it's worn smooth, but one phrase remains. When the breath is remembered, the body shall find shape again. You whisper it. You're not sure why, you just do. And for a moment, the wind around you stops, completely. Then it resumes, soft and easy. But you feel it, a shift, a gathering. Not here, not now, but somewhere. Someone else is dreaming of Eridu. Someone else will find the fragments. And when they do, they'll feel what you felt. The hum, the whisper, the recognition. Because it doesn't need temples. It needs only a pattern. And those are everywhere. In history books, in myths, in bedtime stories, whispered just a little too softly, a little too late. You've done enough for tonight. The god is sleeping again. But now it dreams of you, and when it wakes, no. That's not your burden anymore. You step beyond the city's edge. The stars above are quiet, but not empty. Never empty. Don't look back. You'd like to think it's because you're being brave. But if you're being honest with yourself, it's more like superstition. You walked out of Eridu, carrying more than you walked in with. Something quiet, something ancient, something coiled just beneath awareness. An instinct tells you that looking back might invite it closer. So you walk. Past cracked walls and silent stones, past the ziggurat that no longer points to the heavens and the pit that no longer needs to. Past the tablets, the mask, the spiral etched into your memory like a watermark. You're still trying to make sense of it. What is this god, really? Not a name, not a myth, just a presence threaded through layers of human memory, so old and so deeply buried that even the Sumerians, who built entire cosmologies just to explain shadows, couldn't define it. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's not a god of anything. Maybe it's a god against things, against remembering, against form, against definition itself. You recall the term from one obscure text, Abshu Namshub, which roughly translates to the whisper beneath the deep. a phrase that appears only once in all of Mesopotamian records, on a broken seal stored in a museum basement, probably misfiled under miscellaneous eerie nonsense. That same seal had a diagram, a spiral of course, with concentric eyes and one final, chilling inscription: what is known gathers, what is seen remains, what is forgotten waits. The modern world has no room for gods like this. It doesn't fit on a shrine, it doesn't sell candles, it can't be depicted with wings or fangs or a halo, but it can be imagined, it can be whispered, it can be dreamed, and that's all it needs. You keep walking, the city now behind you shrinking into the horizon. There's a strange comfort in the quiet, though you can't help but wonder if the quiet is watching. Not maliciously, just attentively, like a mirror held up to your thoughts. A fragment of a memory surfaces. You're not sure if it's yours, a dream maybe. You're standing at the edge of a river, or is it a sea? The water is perfectly still, black, not from shadow but from depth. Something moves beneath the surface, not swimming, just shifting. The way something might stir in its sleep when someone nearby starts to remember its name. You say nothing in the dream, you wake up sweating anyway, you glance down at your hands, you half expect the spiral to be marked there now, burned into the palm, etched into the lifeline. Nothing, but the memory remains, a tether. You're not cursed, not possessed, you're just a participant now, a new link in a chain stretching across millennia, looping through temples, tombs, and now you. And somewhere out there, someone else is waking up. Someone else dreaming of a god they don't remember learning about. Someone tracing the same spiral without knowing why. And if they ask, have you heard of the god beneath Eridu? They'll probably laugh. Joke about ancient aliens, cursed cities, YouTube documentaries with too much bass. But if they press further, if they really listen, they'll hear it too. The whisper, the hum beneath the surface, the subtle invitation. Because that's how it spreads. Not through conversion, not through ritual, but through recognition. You pass a row of palm trees on the edge of the old canal. Their roots dig deep into soil layered with centuries of dust and ash and memory. Somewhere beneath them, fragments of tablets still lie, cracked, unread, waiting. And even if no one ever digs them up again, it won't matter. The story has left the stone. It lives in you now. You sit on the edge of a dry irrigation ditch, letting your legs dangle, the desert wind brushing soft against your face. The stars above begin to fade. Dawn is stirring. You wonder how many other cities once had gods like this, gods of silence and forgetting. How many others were buried, sealed, erased. You wonder how many are waking now, piece by piece, as stories like yours are told again. And you realize something simple, something chilling. We were never meant to remember everything. Some stories were never meant to survive translation. Some myths weren't meant to be myths at all. You look toward the horizon, and for the first time in hours, you smile, because the god beneath Eridu has been patient. And now, the sky lightens slowly, bleeding faint gold into the eastern horizon, as though the desert itself has decided it's time to breathe again. You sit quietly, the ruins behind you, the rising sun ahead, and a weight light and invisible, settling into your chest. It isn't dread, not anymore. It's a kind of knowing, the kind that doesn't demand explanation. You stretch your legs, blinking grit from your eyes. Somewhere behind you, the sacred pit still waits, silent. Sealed and now ever so slightly remembered, not enough to awaken, but enough to ripple. And that's how it always begins, doesn't it? Not with prophecy or thunder or flaming swords, but with a ripple, with a stray thought, a whispered line in a forgotten book, a child's dream, a strange symbol drawn in the margins of a notebook for no reason, a memory that doesn't belong to you, but still feels yours. Eridu was the first city, the birthplace of kingship, the blueprint of civilization. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the first firewall, a place where something vast and formless was kept at bay, not through force, but through stories, symbols, and silence. And here you are at the tail end of all of that. Not a priest, not a historian, just a curious wanderer who followed the spiral too far inward. And still, you're not afraid, because something else is rising alongside that whisper now. Not a voice, not a command, but memory. You remember the clay tablets, the eyes, the sealed vessel, the spiral drawn by a trembling hand, the mask without a mouth, the basin that asked you to forget. And you understand the most important truth of all. The forgotten god is not a monster, not a villain, not even a deity in the way we usually understand them. It's an idea. And ideas, especially the old ones, don't need temples. They need minds. They need myths. They need people to glance at a broken statue, feel the hairs rise on their arms and whisper to themselves, "I've seen this before!" The sun crests the ruins now, casting long golden lines across the broken stones. Eridu glows briefly, like a ghost of itself, its shadows retreating into cracks and corners where they've waited for centuries. And somewhere down below, beneath sand and time and rituals carved into the bones of civilization, the whisper returns to sleep. For now. But it doesn't need to stay asleep forever. Because it has you. And the next time someone speaks of Eridu, not the place, but the feeling, you'll know, you'll smile, and maybe you'll say nothing at all. Because some names aren't spoken, some gods aren't praised, some stories survive only in the quiet spaces between sentences, and some whispers don't need to be heard to be heard. Let the desert wind soften into a breeze, barely touching your face. Let the spirals fade into your thoughts like ripples smoothing out across still water. Let the sand settle back into place, covering the chamber, the pit, the forgotten name that never needed to be spoken aloud. Eridu is quiet again. Its gods are sleeping, its priests long gone, their secrets scattered like pottery shards in a dune. You did not break anything tonight. You only remembered. And that's okay. Because remembering isn't the same as awakening. You're not in danger. You're not cursed. You're just carrying a story now, one passed through dreams and dust, carried by stone and sleep. A story older than language, softer than myth, and deeper than anything written in clay. Close your eyes. Breathe. Let the weight lift. Let the spiral uncoil. Whatever lingers beneath the surface of the earth of the story of your mind, it's not reaching for you. Not tonight. It's just watching. And that's all right. Now let your thoughts blur like shadows in moonlight. Let the whisper slow. Let the sand cover the memory once more. You're safe. You're still here, and morning is rising. Time to rest. Time to forget. Just a little. Sleep well.